afternoon. For those of you guys that I've not met before, I'm Ehsan Kattoula. I'm the Assistant Superintendent for Accountability in Cobb County. Today what I'm going to do is talk to you guys a little bit about how Cobb County has approached digital transformation. Some of the stuff is going to be similar to what you guys have done in your own districts. And then toward the end, what I'll do is I always like to have people ask me a question at the end. So please get one or two questions if you want. If we don't answer them today, we can answer them later. So this is going to be a few things that I want to talk about, but really I want to talk a little bit about my journey, my road to digital transformation. When I get excited, I tend to talk, my accent comes out. Just in case you don't know, it's a Middle Eastern accent, so be careful. I used to teach science. I taught science at Wheeler High School, and then I moved to another district. I used to have a joke with my physics students, and the joke was this. I never told them to shut up. I never said be quiet. What I would do is when I'm teaching a physics, I'm doing a problem on the board, and I'm doing it, and all of a sudden the class begins to talk. All I have to do is change the numbers from English to Arabic. So now instead of writing from left to right, I'm writing from right to left. And that became a habit for them that, uh-oh, we're talking. And so they would bring it down, and then we could continue to with the lessons. One of the things that I learned as a former EL student now, or an ESOL student, was that how do we use data? And I was immersed in it when I started teaching back in the late 90s. And I got introduced to the access testing. If you can understand access testing, I think your knowledge of data tends to increase tremendously. Because you've got kids jumping from A1 to A5, A2 to B2, B5 to D. Once you start immersing yourself in that data, you start having some kind of an effect. I taught a class predominantly on-level physics, astronomy, but any student that was enrolled in that class, we were able to move in some form or fashion. Because we were trying to get ready in the state of Georgia. As you know, there was that pesky Georgia high school graduation test. And the science part was one of the most difficult ones to pass. And so at Wheeler, we decided that we're going to support the EL population. And so that was my first immersion in data. How do you support a population of students that tend to have the highest failing rate in a Georgia high school graduation test? And so you start developing plans. You start immersing yourself in the data, start analyzing that data. You dig deeper and deeper and deeper, and then you start creating plans. But because you don't teach all these students, at Wheeler High School, we predominantly had students that were from South America, predominantly kids that spoke Portuguese. And so when we would work with these students, it was critical for us to kind of move their learning. How do you increase their learning? How do you get their ability to move to the next phase? It wasn't about how we're going to teach to the access test. It wasn't about how we're going to teach to the Georgia High School graduation test. We wanted to develop a plan. And from that data understanding, we realized half of the science test was regarding physics. There was, if you took physical science is half chemistry, half physics. And so we decided that we no longer are going to decide to teach Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. We decided that we're going to use a form where the student walks in, and we based it on day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5. When the students walked in, it was day 1, we started looking at their data. We started assessing them to get their formative assessment. We wanted to know what they knew about the content. And then by the 5th day, we would develop some kind of assessment, and then on the following day was remediation. But really, that component, what I learned most about that data was that, one, EL students need more support than anybody else in multiple ways. Because they will not only have a specific characteristic about EL, they might have other characteristics. Reading, writing. They could be students with disabilities. And so you start thinking about how do you make it easier, not just for when you're teaching that class, it's for all the other teachers that are teaching science and social sciences. And so when it comes to data, I realized when it came to data, it had to be at that moment. That's the moment you have to decide, what are you going to do the next moment? What are you going to do the next moment? In the early 2000s, it was still too early for iResponse, for those of you guys that had the clickers. Before that, you would give an assessment, multiple choice, run to the back, put it in the Scantron machine, do the analysis, then come back and unpack how the students did. But once you start collecting the data, this is one of the clear indicators for me about data, which is how fast do we get the results to the hands of the teacher? That became the start of my digital transformation. That is my personal transfer. That I needed to be able to get the data analyzed based on whichever question they missed, which standard they missed, and now hand it off to the teacher. And over time, as you get better, as you guys know, as you get better with this data, people begin to recognize what you can and cannot do. And so eventually I moved as an administrator for the school and eventually moved in my role as an assistant superintendent for accountability. What I realized when I was moved to the assistant superintendent was that we had 112 schools. We have 67 elementary schools, 27 middle schools, 17 high schools, and each one had different characteristics. How do you support 112 schools plus 3 other programs that we have embedded in the school? Now you're not just thinking about EL students, now you're thinking about students with disability, economically disadvantaged, other characteristics that were beginning to become a factor. In 2014, I moved into the central office in June. Luckily, we had the fortunate to hire a superintendent, Mr. Chris Ragsdale. He was hired in January of 2014. And his idea was that we're going to develop a plan of how we're going to get the information to the teachers as quickly as possible. So we developed something internally called Cobb Teach and Learning System, and that's what I'm going to talk a little bit down the road. But the one thing we started looking at is, how do you look at data? So I'm going to share with you a couple of ways that I look at data and how we look to see how we transform a school. Because if you're going to become a transformative agent, you need real-time data. The teachers need access to real-time data. It's not the data that you want to wait 2 days, 5 days, 10 days. Those days are gone. Those days are gone. In this world where we have students that come from different backgrounds, some of our schools, the transiency rate is hitting 54%, and other schools is 5%. How do you work transiency in there? I'm going to show you. How do you analyze the effect of transiency on multiple data sets? So when we started compiling data, the Department of Education started creating their own system. But our system was already started created back in 2013, which is how do we get the information to the teachers quickly? And so we start analyzing some of the information. And this is my line. This is basically me. Put the box in the pencil. Put the box in the pencil. Think about that. You've got a box in front of you, you've got a pen in front of you. Put the box in the pencil. Put the box in the pen. This is the idea that I had to struggle with as a former ESOL student because of the way that my mind works. In Arabic, as I said earlier, you write from right to left. So in my first presentation, I'm getting up all sweating and everything. I get up to speak a presentation in front of all my students, and all of a sudden I say, put the box in the pencil, when I needed to say, put the pencil in the box. And for me, that was the point of how my mind worked, and it wasn't just my mind. I looked to see how other people's mind work, how students. My background, as I said earlier, one of the classes that I taught had 5 adults in it. 5. There was me, the special ed teacher, the ESOL teacher, a parapro, and on Tuesday, Thursday, we had the speech therapist come in there. 5 adults in one classroom. What do you do then? Well, I had a philosophy. If you're an adult in that room, you're a teacher in that room. So we would meet together, talk about the data that we would be collecting. Put the box in the pencil. It is very, very difficult to move a student population. It is difficult to move some of the students. You guys know that. We know for a fact on a state assessment, on a local assessment, on a teacher assessment, when you're trying to get the students to grow, be it on a score on CCRPI, on the Georgia milestones, to move some of the kids from level 1, in level 1, they scored 343, to move them a point. With some of the kids, God is going to have to come sit next to them to move them 1 point. You have those students. I had those students when I taught. We have them in Cobb County. We have them in the state of Georgia. But we know that those students need more support. So how do you use the data to provide more support? So let's think about this. This is one of the areas that we start using. Some of you guys have heard of this, and some of you guys have not. It's the Stanford educational data. I want you to wait and see the whole picture. I'm not starting at the down here. I'm trying to start from the top, just like we do, backward design. I'm going to tell you how the big scope is, then bring it down to how we deal with it at individual students. Stanford educational data, if you've never used it, it's your best friend. It allows you to look at all the data that they accumulate. Their system allows you to collect all the information that is out there, be it in reading, writing, mathematics. In that instance, when we started using this data, I wanted to know who Cobb County should be compared to. We like to compare ourselves to Fulton County, Marietta City, DeKalb County, but I really wanted to push that point. I want to know what other districts outside of Cobb County, outside of the state of Georgia, that we should call. Who's your best friend? We call those BFFs. You know what I call them? DFF. Data friend forever. You need to develop those people because you're going to go to them. I wanted to go to my colleagues in the state of Georgia. I wanted to go to my colleagues outside of the state of Georgia. And so we realized that we're going to create this. So we used their research, and then we started looking at similarities. What similarities would we look at? We use simple things. And everybody uses these data points. These are the daily data points that you don't need to move away from. Who are your DFFs? This is where Cobb County, this is the Stanford research. I just decided to pull you. I used to teach astronomy. So this would be a cluster of galaxies. Find our Milky Way, i.e., there's Cobb County. You can see all the data that is projected on there. But then you're like, wow, there's so many school districts that are similar to us, and there's so many schools that are districts that are not similar to us. Who are your DFFs? Who are your DFFs in the state, and who are out of the state? And so we started putting some characteristics. We decided to create a similarity index. The similarity index is created based on what do I have in common with you? What do I have in common with your district? And so we created this similarity index based on those 4 components. Number of students, socioeconomic, percentage of students with disability, EL learners, and then ethnicity and race. And we just wanted to put it out there and said, we're going to create this number. And that number that you see up here, I just did it, did I not?
You did.
Of course I did. Sorry.
It went away. What happened?
There you go. Thank you. What we found was that there's your similarity to Cobb. Cobb County, we needed to be able to say, yes, it's good to compare yourself to Charlotte-Mecklenburg. Yes, it's good to compare it to LA Unified School District. Yes, to Austin Unified School District. Who are they? But why would you want to compare it to those? Because they're leaders in education. Really? Fine, I give him that. I'll give him their start that is needed. But what are the similarities to Cobb County? How can I make their districts be similar to mine? So when we realized, when we were creating this, we realized these were our DFF outside of the state of Georgia. You're like, how? Baltimore and Cobb County have nothing in common. But they do, if you look at those 4 factors, 5 factors. We started looking at data differently because we needed to be able to see what's making other schools successful. What is making other districts successful? One of the things about digital transformation is the ability to do 2 things. One is to find collaboratives. Who are going to be my collaborative colleagues that I can talk to? Just like you were doing today. 2, how to use this information as a predictive analysis. You're going to hear me say those 2 words. In digital transformation, predictive analysis becomes more critical for you to see where your students are moving to. This presentation is not about me teaching you about data. A lot of you guys know the data. I just want you to think about it just a little bit differently. If I give you 10 seconds to think about which school districts outside of your district, outside of the state of Georgia, are similar to yours. And then you need to give an explanation. The hardest one to accept was Montgomery and Maryland. What we realized was that the characteristics that we were using began to become closer and closer. So what did we do then? Once we started knowing what they are, we started analyzing what were they doing that was great for their districts. What was working for them, what was not working for them. Then we can take that information and start applying it to Cobb County. There's your predictive analysis. All we did is look at the data differently from different states. I know you always want to go to the best districts that are high performing, or the schools that are really as large as yours. Cobb County, based on its size, is 24th ranked right now in size. We are not LA Unified School District. We are not Clark County, Nevada, where if you ever gone to Clark County, it is very wide, and they've got a lot of students. I think they've got 4 central offices that I've heard about. But even though they were so big, you don't see them there because their similarities were not to ours. And so we started looking at the language arts. We always like to compare to our peers in the metro Atlanta, but we also added the ones that were outside our district. This is us talking about reading language. Where do we fit in with them? Because a DFF is not just somebody who's 10 times higher than you. What you're showcasing is who is above me, who's below me. Because the above you is going to give you a reaching point to say, we're going to do as good as they are. And the one below you, what is shown is, how are they going to improve to surpass you? This is that predictive analysis. Who are your DFFs? In math, there's how we measure it. These data points are just selective data points, but you got to go after your similarities. You might not pick the 5 I picked. This year, we decided to pick these 5. Next year, we might move to 5 different ones. Why? Because Cobb County is changing. The dynamic of Cobb County is changing. The demographic of Cobb County is changing. In a movement of information, this is the ultimate force, right there, the graduation rate. So the question that asked here is, what does the graduation profile look like for your district? Have you developed a graduation profile, a K-12 profile, that would use data to say, yes, the student is on track to graduate? And the graduation game is won and lost by one subject, math, 5th grade math and 9th grade algebra. You've seen the data. Yeah, you have. Analyze your 5th grade math scores, and you go follow the track for those kids that failed or did not do very well in math. Or take your 9th grade algebra and see after the repeaters. What are we doing for them? When we talk about hybrid model in digital transformation, what does that look like for kids that we lose track of? You know why algebra is a critical point too? When is algebra taught? Predominantly taught what grade? 9th grade. What ages are predominantly 9th graders? 15. By the time the course is done, how old are they? 16. They just failed math. You think they want to repeat 9th grade again? So what happens? There's your dropout rate. That's when you determine your dropout rate closely. So if a student that no longer wants to be in the classroom face-to-face with the teacher, what are you going to do? You got to move the stick, folks. You got to move it to a different place that they're going to feel comfortable. One of the data analysis we follow with the graduation profile is that we follow the graduation for the students that stay at the schools. In Cobb County, if you stay in the same school for 4 years, the graduation for that school, the lowest we have, is 96% in Cobb County. Our graduation rate is somewhere around 87.2. 87.2. We're proud of that. Last year was 87.2. This year came out 87.4. So here's your question. What happens when your graduation rate plateaus? What do you do then? Which students are you going to go after? What type of learning model are you going to implement? And so when we start analyzing this data, we start asking the question. But it ultimately comes down to, what does a graduate profile look like? Because what is our name of the game? It's to produce better citizens, keep them in Cobb County. Our mantra is that we're going to produce good citizens in Cobb County to come back to Cobb County. It's not easy. It's not. This is the clustering technique that now we looked at it as a comparison at the district level. Now, how do you do it for school levels? We're 113 schools. How do you cluster your students? Oh, we do vertical teaming, Dr. Kattoula. Vertical teaming is phenomenal. I love vertical teaming. But how do you cluster your high schools? Oh, we cluster them by geographically. Let's apply this idea for similarities in a manner of, at the district level we just showed you, and now let's look at it from the school level. We decided that we were going to use these 4 characteristics that are found in the CCRPI, the College Career Readiness Performance Index that the state releases. We decided to use those 4. And these are the similarities we created. The point I want you to look at is right up there. At that point where number 8 is, that means all these schools have something similar to them. But the farther you go, South Cobb, Pebblebrook have the most similarities in those 4 areas. Geographically, are they close? Not as close as other schools next to them. So if you're going to have a data discussion to look at comparison from one school to another, use similarity points to say this is how we're going to pair up these 2 schools. The conversations that need to happen. The learning models that are going to happen. Are you going to apply the same learning model at Walton and South Cobb when the similarities between them is so far? The idea behind digital learning comes into effect as movement of the student's achievement. What does that look like? To apply the same thing across our district for 17 high schools, it's not going to fit, folks. It won't. The closer the similarities, the better pairing you're going to have. Putting these schools together, Pope, Lassiter, Walton, will have more common between them to be able to say, how are you dealing with these specific scenarios? How is your graduation rate at 90? Versus another school, i.e., Wheeler and Campbell tend to have the highest EL population for them. That's why they're paired up together as one of the indicators. They can have a conversation about what is the implementation of EL programs. In predictive analysis, this is what you're looking for. You're using the data to say, I predict that these 2 schools can work together to come up with a curriculum. From the data standpoint, you know what we like. What do we like? The bigger the sample, the better we like. Because then we know if a program is effective. How do you know your program is effective? How do you know as a district leader? How do you know as a principal? How do you know as a teacher a program is effective? When we try to buy curriculum, we are more in habit of buying the curriculum for the whole district than buying it for individual schools. What this is going to show you is if you're going to invest in a curriculum, $1 million, $5 million, $7 million, or be it yet, $60 million, would you not want similarities to say, in this area, we're going to implement this curriculum, this model, we're going to implement this curriculum on this, we're going to take our $60 million and divide it based on similarities. When you look at middle schools, the same concept plays. Now you've got 27 middle schools. Now you start looking to see, now geography doesn't even play a part. We have schools here that are in the southwest part of Cobb and northeast Cobb. You might not know where they're located, but it still happens. In the idea of collaboration, you can start putting schools together. How would you put schools together? School ABC out of the 27 schools. And then the other one is elementary. This is part of the elementary. We have 67. I should have kept the 67 in there because you would have seen it. That it actually is more ingrained than some of these schools that basically we are at the first one. Smyrna Elementary School is just down the road from here. You can't miss it. But when you're looking at it at Russell, when you look at Smyrna and Russell, it is too far regionally from each other. But remember, this data is as good as the data I gather from the schools. Which means this, when I run this similar plots come July, it's going to be completely different. Because we're going to use different characteristics. There's a shift. Our superintendent's intentionality and one of his priorities is to use real-time data to have an effect on student achievement. That's his number 3 priority. But we can't do that without having an effect in other areas. So we created ctls. Cobb Teach and Learning System, or ctls, was created with the vision of Mr. Ragsdale. He wanted to develop something internally where we can move not just the students, we wanted to educate the parents too. We wanted to be able to use real-time data to be able to have an effect on students. I remember my first meeting was in July of 2014. I had just come on board. And we sat there as 4 of us started having this conversation. What is the purpose of this? What is the end game? The end game is the movement of students. The other part that everybody misses is, who does the data belong to? Who does the student data belong to? It doesn't belong to the DOE. It doesn't belong to you. It doesn't belong to me. Who does it belong to? It belongs to the student and the enrolling adult or the biological parent. How fast can we get the data for them to understand what's going on? Imagine if you had the idea of saying, we're going to get the parents involved. Parents like to get involved. I'm going to give you a better one. And this is what I've seen. In the world of education, you've got 10% of parents that are educated in the education system, and they know exactly what to say to get their child moved ahead. Then we have 90%. Who speaks on behalf of those 90%? And the answer is the district, the teachers, the administration. This is why ctls becomes a big component. We're not in competition with any other district. We're not in competition with the state developing their own state longitudinal data set. We are not in competition. There is no competition. It's what we wanted to do to serve the community, to serve the students and the parents. We wanted to be able to say to the parent, here's how your student is doing. We wanted to give them real time. Think about the progress reports that get sent in your district. 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, whatever those weeks are. Imagine if they have real-time information about how their student is performing. It is critical that we engage the parents as quickly as possible. This is not trying to devise something for the teacher. We got to get the parents involved in their child's education system. When that happens, that graduation profile just flowers. It flourishes to say, I can help get my child graduate. This Cobb Teach and Learn system also had the involvement of teachers. And you're going to see that the teachers, as we were building this out, the teachers had an input. They wanted to see how it was going to be able to be built. We started with a simple assessment component. Then we started developing teach and learn component, the parent component, the student component. And it continues to grow every single year. But it's internally developed. And the best part about it is, when you find a mistake in it, when the teachers want to request, and you'll see this, we can implement it quickly. We don't have to wait for somebody else to create it, i.e. Google Classroom. If you're using Google Classroom model. Here, elementary third grade teachers wanted a specific way of seeing the data. All we have to do is contact the partnership that we have, and they can modify it. And we can get it done properly in a quick time. Remember, right now we are living in the transformative age of information being used quickly by the teachers. You want the teachers to buy into this? Make this easy for them. And this is what we were trying to create. Something that could be real time, something that could be useful. This is a better feedback. We develop a process where we can get feedback from the teachers. In this model, we can't improve if the teachers don't give us a say. We can't improve if the teachers don't share what needs to be moved. Think about your digital platform, whatever you use. I'm not going to be critical of it. You ask yourself, can the teacher email the person who's developing this and ask for some request? And make it happen in real time. But what you realize is that you can lump some requests together. We knew that our 6th grade math teachers, because the state changes standards for specific math courses, and when they change standards, you got to change some of the assessment. The state will tell you, we're changing the standards a year from now, 2 years from now. Or sometimes, certain laws are passed. And if certain laws are passed, they don't come into effect until May, June, when the governor signs off on them, and now you're going to have to create something brand new. Think about the time frame that you have. In ctls, it allows you to do that real-time change based on different stuff. It's the teacher buy-in that we needed. In order for you to get to the teacher buy-in, let them have a say in how it's developed. It wasn't 4 people got in a dark room and said, this is ctls, we're going to create it this way. In its showcase, it shows the teacher how they're going to be able to use it. We no longer have to wait for the teachers to be able to say, I can't do this. This idea of predictive analysis, you have to have real-time data quickly. Because if a student enters your class on the first day of August, the third day of August, and you've given them assessments, you got to be able to do something with them when the results are coming back to you. That model of grouping, as people call it, how are you going to put students together? The other part is, this allowed the teachers to start believing in the biggest thing that you fear, which is, how do we do common assessment? Think about your district. Do they do common assessment? What does that look like? Here in real time, the students are taking the same assessment based on the state standards, the same number of questions, with variation of depth of knowledge, but the analysis is all being done by ctls. It tells you which questions the students struggled in very quickly for the next day to be able to say, this is what we're going to reteach. We have 60 kids in a class, or in a math class, we've been talking about algebra. You've got 400 kids that just took an algebra test, and everybody missed question number 7 because it was depth of knowledge level 4. Wouldn't you love to know that the next day to say, wait a minute, we can't move on unless we start unpacking the data of how the students did on this information. That's transformative, folks. That's the predictive component. Is it a good tool? Our teachers have found success in using this tool. How about our parents? Our parents are beginning to engage with this too. Because we're trying to showcase for them, yes, we can give you the state assessment. We can put the state assessment so that you can see it. But how about following your child's assessments throughout the year with that teacher? The other part is that quick scoring that we were talking about earlier. I can't tell you how, when we were seeking information in surveys, what do you teachers want? We just want it to be scored quickly, analyzed quickly, for us to do what? We need to keep teachers teaching. We believe in that. I think all of us believe in that. I think one of the things that you've discussed earlier is, how do you keep teachers teaching when they don't have to go do all this other stuff? CTLS allowed the teachers to be collaborative together because they were given common assessment. It allowed them to say, you know what, we're going to look at not just my students any longer, we're going to look at all 4th grade reading. We're going to look at all of our 8th grade Georgia social studies for our school. The other part, think about the leadership. Think about the school leadership. The school leadership is looking at this because they're asking themselves a question. And I'm going to ask you this question too. And this is one of the questions I ask the principals. When does the principal pivot point occur? When should principals pivot on a curriculum? Is it day 1, day 50, day 80, day 187? If there's 187 days or 190 days, when should a principal pivot on a curriculum? It all relies on the real-time data. They've implemented a curriculum. We've invested a lot of money in it. Where is the point of principal pivot? The data has to be somewhere where the leadership can look at it and say, you know what? We've implemented a good reading program. But let's look at our data in December. 2nd week of December, we've implemented this data. We've implemented for 18 weeks. Let's see what the results of this are. It's called the principal pivot point. When do principals pivot if they don't have real-time data? When do teachers modify instruction if they don't have real-time data? One of the things that we try to move from is the ability to communicate with parents. It's that refining communication to say to the parent, this is how your child is doing. We've been having parent-teacher conferences this past week. That was for our district. Parents were appreciative of this because they were able to see how the student was already doing. This is not a solution for every solution. What I'm telling you is how Cobb County decided to take the lead through our superintendent, Mr. Ragdale, and his vision to say, we're going to develop a Cobb-owned, Cobb-created for Cobb teachers. In multiple presentations that he's done to the board and publicly, that is one of the biggest points that he shines on. is that our teachers are teaching. Our teachers are teaching better. Our retention rate for teachers is better. Because we're trying to give them better areas for them to waste less time and protect instruction time. This is CTLS. If you ever want to visit, that's the website. You can go ahead and learn more about it. We have been trying to make it as friendly as possible for everybody, both the educator and the non-educator. We always seek feedback from the community. We seek back from the teachers. We seek feedback from the students. But for me, CTLS is in our discussion about digital transformation, is the ability to use real-time data to predict what can happen with our current students right now. That's the predictive analysis. That's the digital transformation. That is a big component of digital transformation. Can you use data to predict how certain things will happen in your building? How certain things can happen in a district? One of the things that we dealt with when we were doing this digital transformative was to use virtual learning, how the world was changing. Our community wanted to allow students to be able to take virtual classes. 20 years ago, we started developing what we call Cobb Virtual Academy, similar to the Georgia Virtual Academy. But our process was to be able to allow the students the freedom to be able to take classes virtually because of our high school kids. Our high school kids needed a specific number of hours, either for work, for sports, to be able to deal with that. So our students can take first period, second period face-to-face, and then third and fourth period be virtual. In this model, what we have is a supportive teacher as an entity for this virtual learning. But the model still exists that we have to give parents choice. That's when COVID hit, our CTLS started working perfectly. Students didn't have to go to Google Classroom. Students don't have to chase. All the classrooms were placed in CTLS. The schedule was placed in CTLS. The roster was placed in CTLS. And the assessments were placed in CTLS. One-stop shop. That was the movement that we were trying to create. Mr. Ragsdale's belief, one of his true beliefs, is that we need to give our parents a choice. They want virtual, we're going to give them virtual. They want face-to-face, we go face-to-face. Cobb County opted to do face-to-face. The majority of our parents wanted to have face-to-face. We had parents that didn't want to be face-to-face. We gave them Cobb virtually. But how did we deal with the kids that were K-5? With those kids, we created what's called elementary virtual program, where we had real-time data, real-time teachers with the students teaching those classes. They were still virtual, staying at home, but the teachers were there live. It was an easy move for us. Do you know why? It's because we had CTLS. It was developed by us for Cobb County students. But the ultimate thing was our Cobb Online Learning Academy at Cobb Horizon. Cobb Horizon was developed for our students that needed credits. These were the kids that were 16 years old and you had to go find them. They decided they failed algebra, they're going to go ahead and drop out of school. Now you got to go find them and bring them back. So Cobb Horizon really was going out there looking for students. These are the ones you know who we're talking about. These are the kids that are 16 years old with 5 credits. 17-year-olds with 5 credits. This is where the blended model starts coming into effect. That the students can learn from a teacher and do it virtually. The success we had in this was based on what we could do with CTLS. Everything now moves through CTLS. So when the student becomes on track at Cobb Horizon, they can go back to their home school and take classes in their home school and graduate with their class. It's that idea of how do you maintain cohort together. As we start looking into this one, why digital transformation? Really, as I told you my story, I really wanted to focus on a specific group of students. And what I realized is as people start getting to know you, your strength, they just start giving you bigger bowling balls. They give you a 3 pound, 5 pound, 7 pounds, and the next thing you know, you're moving boulders. And those boulders is what I enjoy. Thank you, I appreciate you.